Okay. We are very honored and excited to have William here tonight. To introduce him now, I'll ask Amy Stuckey to come up and give our audience a brief summary of his background.
Thank you. So many of you might probably know William. He's been coming to Minneapolis for several years, but with COVID, he's taken a little hiatus. So we're very excited to have him back in person here. We affectionately call this Meader Week because he's here for the whole week, and it started at Lake Harriet Spiritual Center, and we're really excited to be here tonight as well. He is here for the whole week. He also does esoteric astrology readings, and he's doing that here in person this week as well. He is a very gifted communicator of the esoteric philosophy. If any of you have experienced his teachings in the past, he has a nice online presence now since COVID, and has been doing several talks for the national chapter. And he has one coming up. Say it again. This September, 4 Mondays.
October 16th, first Monday, 4 Mondays in a row.
Yeah, that one's called Homeward Bound, the Soul's Return to the Ashram. And he's done several of these for the national chapter. So you can also check that out. But this weekend, we're very excited to have him for 2 full days. It's a very wonderful and deep way of engaging this philosophy. So if you have the opportunity, there's information in the back. He's also written 2 books, which I highly recommend. Also very good way of learning more and getting a deeper sense of the philosophy. Shine Forth was his first book, and the Supernal Night is the second book. So very excited to have William, and well, I think it's him now.
Good to be back. I'm going to move this if I don't need it. Yes, so it's good to be back. I did a talk the other day at another location, and was letting people know that it's good to be back on a couple levels. On the one level, it's good to be back because I love to reunite with people that love this philosophy, but also this is my origin point. I started my life here in Minneapolis, right kind of near Lake of the Isles, and then moved out to Stillwater when I was 10 years old, and went to school at Mankato State, and then after that I headed west, and that was in 1977. So it's been a long time since I called it home, but it still has that heartfelt connection. So it's good to be back. Yeah, my subject today is a near and dear subject to me because it's so pertinent to our times. It's titled "The Soul of Humanity Evolves Through World Crisis." And my goal is to help you understand how this philosophy sees the underlying principles and underlying. My subject today is a near and dear subject to me because it's so pertinent to our times. It's titled "The Soul of Humanity Evolves Through World Crisis." And my goal is to help you understand how this philosophy sees the underlying principles and underlying energetic processes that are taking place that gives us a foundational understanding of what the heck is going on out there. Because I don't know if you noticed it, but it's pretty crazy if you haven't noticed. And so that's my goal. The way I'm going to do this is I'm going to speak there's several parts to this presentation I'd like to share with you. I'm going to speak a while, and then I'm going to open it up for questions, and I'm kind of going to go back and forth between speaking and questions. So if you have a question, hold on to it, and when I open it up, it'll be ready for you, okay? The only thing I ask with Q&A is that try as much as you can to stay kind of related to the topic. Because, this philosophy is so interesting. There's so many threads. And a lot of times, you hear something and go, oh, that kind of reminds me of something about the spiritual process of death. Well, I'm going to ask that question. Oh, this reminds me of the seven, so it's really easy. And I'm the guiltiest of them. I love those tangents, but I got to try to hold it together. So is that fair enough?
Yes.
Okay. So the main title is The Soul of Humanity. It starts, The Soul of Humanity, and that's a really important starting point for our conversation. Because you see, in this philosophy, it's believed that the whole of humanity is actually one entity, one living being. And that one entity has a soul. And that one entity has a personality, a lower self. And everything that happens to that one entity called humanity, in terms of its evolution, the principles of evolution of consciousness, are identical to the evolutionary principles within each of us. And as I go through this, I may go back and forth a little bit between talking about the whole of humanity and its struggle and evolution, but referencing it back to how that is also related to an individual's journey, and how there's an analogy that is important to see. One of the things about this philosophy that you learn all quickly when you really dive into it is the role of analogy and correspondences in understanding this philosophy. I come from the Alice Bailey stream of this philosophy, and the author of those writings is the Tibetan. He really talks about how the law of correspondence and the principle of analogy, that's how you're going to really learn this philosophy. So I'm going to do a little of that, okay? So the soul of humanity evolves through world crisis. And like with an individual, we have these two parts to us. Are we okay? Okay. Yeah. Like with an individual, we have two parts to us, a higher and lower self. And so does humanity. Each of us, you have a day-to-day consciousness, which is your personality, and you have a soul consciousness, which is that higher part of you. So let's define soul here to begin with. What is soul? Soul is defined in many ways in this philosophy, but one of the simplest ways to understand soul is that soul is it's an aspect of consciousness that is of the highest order within us. The human soul is said to be a composite of two major things. A composite of higher love, actually almost Christ-like in its love nature. And the second component is it represents the sum total of wisdom that is held within us. But that wisdom is acquired wisdom. In other words, the sum total of all the wisdom that each of us has acquired over the vastness of time, over countless incarnations, that is collected within us. And that is a big part of what soul is. So the human soul, an individual's human soul, the love portion of it, all of it is contained in an instrument called, or a vehicle called the causal body. The causal body. You have a physical body, you have an emotional body, you have a mental body, and those three together make up personality. But beyond that, deeper than that, there's this structure called the causal body, and it's holding what we would call your soul's consciousness. It's holding that higher quality of love, and it's holding that acquired wisdom over the vastness of time that you've earned. The love part of it is there already. While in other words, your causal body is inherently Christ-like. This is why sometimes the soul has been called the Christ in you. It truly is the Christ in you. But the wisdom part of it is not in there naturally. It has to be earned. And so you earn through the crucible of life and lessons learned and struggles over the vastness of many incarnations. Wisdom is actually stored in the causal body as wise faculty, and that carries from one incarnation to the next, because that's what reincarnates. What's reincarnation? What reincarnates? It's the content of the causal body. The causal body itself, that's what moves from one incarnation to the next, to the next, to the next. So, for our purposes today, just understand that for those of us on the path particularly, but anybody really, there's these two parts of us that are so important: soul consciousness and personality consciousness. And for a human being, for the vast majority of our incarnational history. It's the personality consciousness that's being developed. And the soul consciousness, the causal body, is in behind the scenes. It's deep, it's on the higher mental plane, and it's deep, but there's no awareness of it. So much of the evolutionary journey when we entered into the human kingdom millions of years ago, so much of the journey has been to develop personality, a lower self. And eventually, we come to the point in our evolution where we become what are called integrated personalities. So let me define that, okay? So remember that the personality has three parts to it. That's why it's sometimes called the threefold personality. There's a mental component to it, emotional component to it, and a physical component to it. Now, those three components are, when they work together, that's what we call personality, lower self. Some people might call it ego, okay? Now, but there's a period in the long evolution of consciousness where that personality achieves integrated status. What does that mean? That means that those three parts of us, mental, emotional, physical, are integrated and they work well together. And an integrated personality is a really powerful personality in the world, but there is no soul infusion. There's no awakening to the soul. So very powerful, usually very selfish. You see it out in the world right now a lot, but I'm not naming names. Okay? No names. Okay? And it's weird. I feel like there's people behind me watching.
I know.
Kind of strange.
No, they're lurking.
So, and then what happens is, to an individual, there's a moment where they have an awakening, and they awaken for the first time to that causal body. And what that really means is they've awoken for the first time to their own duality. They've awoken to the realization that there's something deep inside that's higher and wiser and more loving, and that's somehow related to who they are. And then they're very familiar with the lower. And so they awake to those two things together. And that begins, that's where we in this philosophy call the beginning of the path. One can argue that the thousands of lifetimes of developing the personality first is kind of like the path as well. But in this philosophy, we define the beginning of the path when that inner duality has been realized. Are you with me? Everybody following this? Okay. So in an individual's life, they begin a whole journey in what is called the probationary path, from the awakening all the way to what we call the first initiation. Well, and that whole probationary path is actually on a larger scale. When we look at all of humanity, that's where humanity is today. Humanity is struggling on the probationary path. And and just like an individual eventually will come to a point where they begin to leave the probationary path, that's what we call initiation. So too, humanity as a whole is struggling to achieve what we call that first initiation. So much of the challenge around today's world situation is because humanity is approaching the first initiation. Now, the subtitle of this talk is all about the soul of humanity. It evolves through global crisis. Why is that? Well, in the human kingdom, and only in the human kingdom, crisis is actually a necessary prelude to major expansions of consciousness. Crisis is the burning ground period that demonstrates readiness and proving your fitness to take a great initiatory step in your evolution. So let's talk about why does humanity evolve through crisis, both individually and collectively? Why? This takes me into the subject of the 7 rays. Now, there are 7 rays in this philosophy. There are 7 sacred life energies from the one life. The one life is another word for God. And that those 7 rays are all unique. They are, in a human being, those 7 rays manifest as unique patterns of consciousness. And there are actually 7 types of souls. I mentioned this the other day at the talk too. Every human being has a soul ray that is with you for thousands of lifetimes. And that soul ray is what conditions the way you see the world. Think of a ray as a lens through which life looks out. It's a lens, a perceptual lens, that how you see the world, how you interact, how you act and react, and how you frame your interests. And so a ray is what is sometimes called an organizing principle. It's an organizing principle. It organizes the patterns of consciousness in a way that is different from one ray to another. For instance, there's a type of ray, we call it the 5th ray, where that ray organizes consciousness in a way that supports scientific understanding of reality. Whereas another ray, let us say the 3rd ray, that's called the ray of active intelligence and adaptability, that type of soul often organizes consciousness around issues having to do with economic concerns. And often people with this type of ray soul, if they're awake to the soul, are often they're very active in trying to coordinate activities in support of a better world through economic endeavor. And I can go through all 7 to talk about that, because each of those 7 actually tend to support certain social institutions, because institutions are also living. Government is an entity. Education is a being. Economics and business is a category of consciousness. The arts and culture is a category of consciousness. Science, religion. These are all categories of human consciousness, each evolving over the vastness of time. And each of those have a higher nature and a lower nature. And each of those is going to go through a process of struggling to transform the lower in support of the higher, just like you and me. No different, no different. So that's just the diversity of understanding a little bit about the 7 rays, but I'm bringing the rays up because I want to talk about one particular ray. And that is that if souls can be, individual souls can be on any of 7 rays, and they can, and those rays define their purpose in the long run, the soul of humanity is also on a ray. And that soul of humanity is on the 4th ray. And the 4th ray has a name. It's called the ray of harmony through conflict. Harmony through conflict. Take note, it's not called the ray of harmony and conflict. Not called that. The ray of harmony through conflict. It's through crisis and conflict that humanity must grow. And what is the nature of the conflict? At the core of it, it's the conflict between your higher self and your lower self. Or as Kyle Gibran would say in The Prophet, the drama between the God within us and the pygmy in the mist. The pygmy in the mist. And they war with each other. See, what happens is this way, for an individual, but this is also for humanity, keep in mind, they're the same. For an individual who's approaching the first initiation too, you have your awakening. The individual starts to see that there's a higher set of principles. What is the soul is always that part of you that's impressing on your consciousness a higher value system, a sense of inclusivity. It's impressing you with understanding that it's all about unity through diversity. And that soul of humanity, just like an individual soul, is trying to impress that personality and have that personality begin to yield to the soul's authority and guidance. And that's what we call the process of soul personality fusion. To see what happens is an individual, when they, they wake up to the soul, and as they go, they start to think, I think that higher thing I'm sensing in me is maybe that's actually who I should be in a more day-to-day way. So they start to commit themselves to try to more fully live that higher quality. So maybe they start adopting principles like deciding to serve and make a difference in the world by helping others. They may decide that they really want to study more and learn more and build their higher mind, and they also maybe want to learn how to meditate, feeling that there's something about meditation that could really make a difference. But see, so when they start to really do that, all of a sudden the personality, the lower self says, not so fast, buddy. Not so fast. The lower self says, hey, I've been running the show for thousands of lives. And just because you hear this faint little whisper, you think I'm going to let go of the reins? Forget it, says the personality, and a battle begins. A battle between your higher self and your lower self. A battle between wisdom and mere knowledge. A battle between higher love and desire. Actually, it's a battle between the future and the past, too. Conflict. Harmony through conflict. It's inherent in the human condition that this battle must take place, individually and collectively. It's not true in the animal kingdom. I could spend a whole seminar just on talking about those earlier kingdoms and what's trying to happen in those kingdoms, but it has nothing to do with conflict, and it's not about the fourth ray. But it is. And why is the fourth ray the ray of the soul of humanity? Because we're the fourth kingdom. The first kingdom is the mineral, second kingdom is the plant, third kingdom is the animal, fourth kingdom is the human, and there are three above us. So the kingdoms themselves, the number of the kingdom corresponds to the number of the ray that is the strongest animating force in those kingdoms. So, like for instance, the third ray is very much related to the third kingdom. That's the third ray on that level is instinctual consciousness. And so much of animal consciousness is about cultivating instinctual consciousness. There is no battle between a higher and lower nature in your pet dog. Your pet dog. There's no battle. Or your pet cat, although I know the cat thinks otherwise. Okay. But don't believe the cat. Don't believe the cat. So that's the underlying principle in terms of why humanity is going through this. But now, there are some other things that really tie into this that are so important, because what I've just shared with you is sort of a principle that applies not just now, but it's been around for a long time, the discovery of the duality. But so what makes now so important? What makes now so important is that we are going through two major energetic transitions at the same time. We are going through an astrological transition, as you know, from the Piscean age to the Aquarian age. But we are also going through a rayological transition. And now I'm going to talk about the rays in a different way, because we're going from a sixth ray age to a seventh ray age. So not only do individuals have individual ray types, not only does the whole of humanity have a ray type, the fourth ray, but these rays on a larger scale are said to come and become more dominant for centuries. And there are great rayological cycles, and we are exiting a sixth ray cycle and entering into the seventh ray cycle. And these aren't like cycles where one day it ends and the other day it begins. No, it's a huge overlap. Now, people in my work, we have differences of opinion of how big that overlap is, but most people lean to the idea that the total overlap is probably a couple hundred years. A couple hundred years. it is said that we won't enter into the Aquarian age, for instance, in fullness until the year 2117. 2117. So, and if it's 200 years, we're about at the midway point. More to be said about that in a minute, because now I want you to understand that the rays, the same thing. These great ray cycles are happening where the sixth ray is extracting itself, it's exiting, and the seventh ray is coming into manifestation. In fact, the workshop I'm going to be doing this weekend here in Minneapolis is all about the seventh ray to really get an understanding of that. So in this transition, we got these two things happening simultaneously, and that's not always how it works in astrological transitions. You don't normally have a rayological transition happening to happen at the same time as an astrological transition, but it is the case today. And so that's setting up a situation where the collective consciousness of humanity is being influenced by two forces, two astrological differing forces and two rayological differing forces. And that is causing greater polarities. Some people are going to identify and internally feel most comfortable with a certain pattern and others the other pattern. And so what happens when you have these kind of overlaps is you end up having increased polarization. Have you noticed? Increased polarization. So in a certain sense, what we're seeing today is so predictable in that sense, so incredibly predictable. And in many ways, the antidote to it, which we'll get to more fully in a bit, but the antidote to it lies in your hands. In your hands. So what I want to do is I want to share with you an understanding of the two rays and the signs and get an understanding of what does this transition look like. But here's a place where I'm going to stop for a moment just to say, do you have any questions at this point? Anything you want to ask at this point? Yeah.
So you said that at some point we become aware of our duality.
Yep.
And did this happen at the first initiation or before probation or probationary, or where are you on that, on the initiation thing?
Right. When you first become aware of your duality, it's long before the first initiation. It marks the awakening, and that marks the very beginning of the probationary path. Very beginning. Because for the first time, you're awakening to the soul itself. Now, an individual who goes through an awakening will often misunderstand it. You know, they sense something deep inside, something spiritual, and it's like a flashing force, but it's fleeting. It's fleeting. And it feels Christ-like because it is Christ-like. It's your causal body. You're recognizing the consciousness of the causal body for the first time. And in the Western societies particularly, because we're kind of conditioned around Judeo-Christian thinking, a lot of people, they have their awakening and they think that Jesus came to them. That's what the born-again Christian experience is really about. It has nothing to do with Jesus coming to you. It's an enormous misunderstanding, but an understandable and almost predictable misunderstanding. Jesus didn't come to you, I promise you. Jesus is the head of the sixth ray ashram today, and he's got a lot more things to do than that. But it's an understandable thing. And so people will go one of two routes because of that. They become fundamentalists in some theology, and they become very literal in their interpretations. They had this incredible experience, and they want to find a way of recapturing it. And so they look out into the world and they find religion, and they find that fundamentalist theology, that must be the right way to understand it. Why? Because it's the oldest. So it becomes very literal, and it's predictable. That's what one group who have an awakening will experience. And I'm not just talking about Christianity. There's fundamentalism in Hinduism, and obviously in the Islamic systems. For the Hindu, it's Krishna that came to them, you see. But there are some people that instead of going the way of orthodoxy in this awakening, what they do is they do what I fondly call the process of spiritual smorgasbord shopping. Spiritual smorgasbord shopping. Got to go to this workshop. Oh, it didn't happen there. That must not be. Go to this work. Oh, it didn't happen there. So and the Tibetan calls that process the network of futility. Network of futility. But that's okay, because either way, life will never be the same again. Life will never be the same again. And at the awakening, for the individual, we're told that at that moment, you catch the master's eye. The inner master's eye. It's as if, you see, your soul, according to the ray of your soul, is part of an inner ashram. And really the whole path of evolution is to slowly transform your consciousness and end up lifting your consciousness all the way back into the ashram. And service is an outpicturing of all of that at the same time. So what happens is that at the first initiation, you catch the master's eye. It's like the master of the ashram. And these are masters that are very familiar with theosophy. Master Moria, first ray ashram. Master Kuhumi, second ray ashram. Master Rakuzi, also known as Saint Germain, third ray ashram. I could go with all of them. But the point is that these are ashrams that theosophy and masters that theosophy is very familiar with. And so that master senses that somebody has just awoken to their own duality, even though it's fleeting, and they take note. It's like, a spark of light has just entered into the aura of the ashram. Take note, off to what I was doing. So that's the beginning. That's where the awakening occurs in the duality, even though it's fleeting. And that's also, the other day I did a talk on the third eye. And I don't know if you were there, but some of you were. And I don't know if you remember, I mentioned that at the beginning, the third eye of the lighted lamp begins to flicker. Flicker. I didn't say it's steady, it's flickers, because this early experience is fleeting. And so sometimes I feel connected. Now I don't. I feel connected. Now I don't. Well, the light in the head and the third eye, that's the corresponding understanding of it. Okay. But when it goes steady, toward the end of the probationary path, then you're right up against taking the first initiation. So humanity is on the probationary path, and a lot of the crisis that is happening today is related to preparations for humanity to take that initiation. And it all ties into these overlapping energies that I'm talking about. So that was a long answer to your question. Any other questions? Yeah.
In relation to that, there was a great explosion of spiritual seeking in the 80s and 90s.
Yes.
And now it's, there were many groups. Now there are not so many groups.
Yeah.
And I always thought in terms of it's a group effort. We work with group, and now it's so much has disappeared. Yeah. I'm wondering if you have some reasoning or ideas how can we not bring that together again, but how do we proceed more individually?
Right. Well, so did you hear her question? Did you hear it? Okay. The first thing you need to know is that what you're talking about is groups that would refer to themselves as spiritual groups.
It was like that spark you're talking about. They did the non-traditional, right. But they still did, many of them did some very spiritual things as well. Sure. Just, it wasn't just psychic development, it was spiritual.
Right. but in this philosophy, keep in mind that there's something called the new group of world servers. Now, the new group of world servers represents, there's a couple of definitions, but the simplest definition is that it represents the sum total of all people on the planet who have some measure of awakening to their higher nature, who are, as a result, trying to live from that place more fully and try to transform their lower nature so that it can be expressed more through the lower nature. And they have a growing urge to serve and uplift the larger whole in some way. But most of the people that are part of the new group of world servers are completely unconscious of the fact that they're part of the spiritual group. By far, 95% at least are unaware of it. And there are members of the group of world servers in all categories. They're in the business world, they're in economics, they're in politics, believe it or not, they're in education. So even though on one level you might think that the groups are declining, on another level, when you widen the interpretation of how to look for the groups, it's actually growing. So it's actually growing. Okay. Okay. Any other questions? Okay. So let me.
Anybody on Zoom?
Should I be asking questions on the Zoom people?
I don't see.
How do they ask questions? Do they?
Oh, they can just speak up
Oh,
if they want, otherwise they can continue to chat, but I don't see anything, so.
okay.
Hope you have a question?
No, I'm just saying this is how we do it, is we just take ourselves off video or onto video if we're not, and then we just speak up, or we can, if we're shy, we do it in chat. So, okay, so I follow-up question to what you just said. If there's 95% of this group are not aware, that would include like medical, probably, even what I do, therapists, construction workers. I mean, this is being of service in a broader way, I think I used to think that the group of world servers were the ones in these groups seeking spirituality. But it really, okay, was it originally that narrow and it's broadened? Or has it always, do you have a sense, has it always been meant to be that broad group where 95% aren't aware? So they're just awakening. I know this is it's almost a discussion here, but so they're just awakening to wanting to be of service. They're not awakening to the fuller awakening of spiritual.
Yes, except we have to be sure that we want to know what we mean by the word spiritual too, because we do have a tendency to see spiritual as meeting in groups like this or in a church or something. But, a person that is committing their lives to, let us say, in a fifth ray way to find solutions to medical issues that would redeem and help humanity in a medical sense, let us say, that person may have no connection to this kind of group, and yet that person, because they're committed and sense a deeper sense of responsibility, that person has their soul consciousness playing out, and they not necessarily would even be attracted to this kind of group at all. They wouldn't be attracted, just like you may not be as attracted to that kind of group. So people group according to their ray nature a lot of times. So you have to consider all of that as part of the new group of world servers. See?
Yeah, and the distinction is that the soul consciousness playing out is the distinction, not this thing that we have in the new age of awakening to consciousness.
It's a different type. It's each ray will have a type of awakening that the other ray types will tend to say, "Oh, that's not an awakening," and you know what I mean? It's like the ray types can be in conflict with each other.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, in fact, it is said that the fifth ray ashram is the one that's demonstrated the most success in terms of human evolution. Mm-hmm. You and I are part of the second ray or sixth ray ashram, most likely. I'm just generalizing here. But the fifth ray ashram is actually proving itself to be the most successful in transforming humanity at this time in history. And that's the ashram of science. Mm-hmm. So you got to really widen our understanding of what constitutes spirituality here, okay? Mm-hmm. So let me continue now. Unless there are other questions. Any other questions? Okay. Oh, yeah.
What ray would like the social sciences be in, or was that?
Social scientists?
Yeah.
They're
sociology side.
they are either second ray or they could be fourth ray too, because the fourth ray rules psychology. So it's, yeah, two or four. Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah. Where, for instance, religious people that are very devoutly religious, that's a sixth ray tendency. So they're coming from the sixth ray ashram. They're going to try to transform humanity using the lens of the sixth ray. And that's going to play out different than the lens of the first ray or the second ray. You see what I'm saying? So when you really get into this philosophy, you really start to dive into and honor these absolutely different yet sacred and equally sacred approaches to answering the mysteries of life and evolution and our relationship to divinity. You see? Okay, so we've got this transition going on. Now let's talk about that transition. The sixth ray is the one that's exiting. We're told that the sixth ray began its exit, its withdrawal, in the year 1625. And it's still in withdrawal. And the seventh ray began to come into stronger and stronger energy in the year 1675. Now that seems like a long time ago, but when it comes to these things, that's actually just yesterday in a certain sense. And that these two rays are totally different. The sixth ray, which by the way is also a ray that's strongly accented through the sign of Pisces, is called the ray of idealism and devotion. And the sixth ray is what, in a way, has all of us for the last 2,000 years or even more have this underlying sixth ray tendency that's out there. And that's what led all of us to help us inwardly yearn to aspire to find God within. The sixth ray is the ray that is underlying all religion today. Indeed, the department of religion, that's what occultism refers to. The department of religion is a manifestation of the sixth ray. That's why, of all the departments, the political departments, the education, economic, all the departments, the sixth ray is the one that's in the deepest crisis, although all of them are. Religion is in the deepest crisis, is what I guess I'm saying. That's why, and you can see it in the rise of fundamentalism. You see, religion is in decline, but in a general sense, the only part of religion that is still very strong is the fundamentalist evangelical thinking. And that's because that's the old order digging its heels in, going back to the basics, but it's based on an underlying fear of what is internally sensed as coming. And so religion is having the most difficult, and as a result of that, the glamours associated with the sixth ray are going to rise as well. Now, glamour is a word in this philosophy that means distortions of perception. And each ray, when you study it, you realize that a lot of times it's important to understand it by understanding how it can be distorted. Now, the glamours of the sixth ray, there are many glamours of the sixth ray. There's the glamour, for instance, of what's the term for it? The Messiah complex is an example of the sixth ray glamour. But a big one that's really playing out today, or has been over the last few years, is what is called the glamour of martyrdom. The glamour of martyrdom. And that's dangerous. And we see and that comes out of the fundamentalist perspective of whether it's Christianity or Islam or wherever, okay? So the danger of the end of a cycle is that you're going to see more of the glamours and distortions of that ray because it's more rigid. It's just like a human being, you know, in a cycle of a ray, the beginning of the cycle is sort of the birth, and it goes through a life cycle. It just happens the last couple thousand years, but a life cycle, then you get into maturity, but then as you get into old age, just like all of us, we're getting a little stiffer as we get older and a little less able to go with the flow and find new ways of doing things. Well, it's the same thing when it comes to these rheological patterns, okay? So the sixth ray in its rigidity is strongly present right now. The thing is that, and by the way, I should mention that rays are also animating larger living systems. So I just said, I gave you an example, the sixth ray rules all religion, no matter what it is. Because you see, at the root of every religion, there's always a sense of ideals, the ray of idealism, devotion, and a devotion to something. Could be a devotion to a savior, could be a devotion to a guru, could be a devotion to a text. But there's always that sense of devotionalness that is at the root of theology. And that ray is the one that's withdrawing. And that's why there's such crisis in the spiritual community worldwide. Yeah, so contrast that now with the seventh ray a little bit. The seventh ray is called the ray of ceremonial order and magic. Ooh, sounds kind of mystical. Ceremonial order and magic. But the seventh ray is an energy that's growing, and it's trying to help us move our spiritual awareness down to the physical plane. See, the seventh ray it's trying to bring heaven to earth. It's trying to ground spirituality. It's trying to shape our consciousness with a sensitivity to the idea that if we can repattern the way we outwardly live and redesign the way social structures are working in order that more of the best of the human spirit can be expressed through those societal systems, that's all about the seventh ray. It's a very grounding ray. This is why one of the big differences between the sixth ray and the seventh ray, the sixth ray is called the ray of mysticism. The seventh ray is called the ray of practical mysticism. The seventh ray has a much stronger mental component to it, not just a heart component. Whereas the sixth ray is far more focused on heart, with even somewhat of a disregard to the mind. The seventh ray says, are you kidding me? The mind is as sacred as your head. And so it's about a strong mental realization coupled with profound Christ-like love, with a commitment to bring both of those into the world to repattern things so that we can not only live more successfully through our social systems and institutions, but that actually we can actually become more unified in the process. So that's what's trying to catch. But these are overlapping. These are overlapping. And so it's creating polarities. One is emphasizing the past. The other is trying to emphasize the future. One is therefore going to, at this time, the sixth ray is going to create excessive conservatism and a tendency toward fundamentalist thinking and tradition, because it's emphasizing the past energy, whereas the seventh ray is all about the new. Not surprising, the seventh ray has a deep connection to Aquarius. You see, while the Pisces has a deep connection to the sixth ray. You see? So the tension is only growing, and this is causing what we call the burning ground. The burning ground. And humanity is now walking the burning ground. And it ties in with approach to the first initiation for the whole human kingdom. Ties into it. Yeah, okay. So let's talk a little bit about that burning ground. As I said, the whole of humanity, its soul nature is fourth ray. So we're going to have to go through burning grounds to get to the other side. But I don't know if, if you think about your own burning ground experiences personally, I don't know for you, for me, I can tell you this, that over my life, anytime I've had a big crisis in my life, it could be a relationship crisis, maybe a career crisis, maybe a financial crisis, whatever it is, my lower self looks at the situation and says, there's no hope. No. My higher self kicks in and says, trust, take it a day at a time, do your best. So I find that, but for me, the whole thing looks like a black cloud in my personality. Black cloud. But the higher self is whispering, saying, bring your best, your love into it, and trust, and move forward. So always for me, I always find that eventually I seem to find myself on the other side of that cloud. And sometimes it's hard to figure out how did I get here, because it seemed impossible before, but I'm now here. That's one big realization. But a bigger realization, when you get to the other side of that cloud, the burning ground, when you get to the other side, the bigger realization is, for me, is I'm different. I'm different. I understand life more than I did before. I have an understanding of the challenges of the human experience in a way that I didn't before. I have a measure of wisdom that in the past was only knowledge that I didn't. So I've got wisdom that I didn't have before. I'm different. I'm different. The same is true on a collective level. The same is true for all of humanity. We have to walk this burning ground. And it's the disciples of the world that have to be the antidote to that process, the testing period. You see, how to put this? In many ways, the burning ground is not only created by the tension, but also the burning ground creates the antidote to the problems we have. So for instance, let's talk about an example of the burning ground, okay? If you go back 50 years ago or less, the idea that humanity is decimating our Mother Nature and the whole idea of environmental protection, you just didn't hear anything about that. I mean, there were people here and there, sure, but compared to how we look at it now, compared to 50 years ago, it's an enormous difference. So the burning ground is we awaken to the fact that we're harming Mother Nature because we have this wrong idea that somehow we're supposed to master nature when in fact we are constituent parts of her. So when people are awakening to a higher value system, which is part of the soul of humanity, they're recognizing that we're damaging the environment in very severe ways. And that's part of the hot coals that we're walking across. But out of that comes the antidote, because out of that comes the emergence of the environmental movement. And those people are being inspired by the soul of humanity to see a higher value system and act on it. So the burning ground is an interesting thing. It's both the problem and the source of the solution. But there's lots of burning grounds right now. Lots of burning grounds. You know, for instance, I don't know if my numbers are correct. This goes back a few years, but a few years ago, I remember reading that the number of people in the world today who die from starvation or disease related to malnutrition was 30,000 a day. A day. I calculated it back then. I calculated what that meant, and it was something like 1 every 6 seconds. Somebody just died. There's another. There's another. While there are places where or at that time, there was a surplus of food, about 4% surplus of food, and some of it was rotting in silos. That's wrong relationship. That's burning ground stuff right there. That's burning ground. And that just reminds me, just said something that I should have even said earlier, so I'm going to say it now. One of the most important ideas having to do with getting through this period is what the Tibetan and the Alice Bailey calls the principle of right relationship. The principle of right relationship. And the whole future of humanity is to cultivate a deeper recognition of right relationship. Because, you know, if you think about it, when we wake up to the fact that we're damaging the environment, that's an awareness of wrong relationship. When we think about so many people dying, imagine 30,000 people. You get it. Imagine if in Minnesota, you have lots of towns that have like 30,000 people. That means every day, one of those towns gone. Every day. It's staggering when you really think about this, while there is a potential surplus of food in the world, see? So right relationship is the core, and it's one of the biggest principles that relate to the first initiation. The first initiation is governed by the urge to find right relationship. Now, it's not, sometimes we think that means interpersonal relationship, and it can. Right now, we see it today. We see what's the right relationship between men and women. What's the right relationship between nation and nation? What's the right relationship between a government and those it governs? What's the right relationship between religion and religion? In many ways, that's the big core question. And that the soul of humanity is, if there's one thing it's trying to impress on us, it's this sense of look at life through the lens of right relationship. And by doing so, you're going to discover where there's wrong relationship. You're going to discover if you're looking for right relationship, you become much more aware of wrong relationship. But if you're totally disconnected with that, then you're not going to see it. And that's why there's so much resistance to doing the things that we all know need to be done to make the world a better place, because the masses have no awakening yet to the soul. They just don't. And that's not a criticism. That's just a place on the path. Just a place on the path. So the search for right relationship is so central, folks, to this process. And as I say, in a way, it provides us with a understanding of what is wrong relationship because of that. Quiz question. It's an unfair quiz question because I didn't bring it up yet, but I want to call it a quiz question anyway. What sign of the zodiac is most related to relationship? Libra. Gold star. Yes, you got to get gold star. Libra. Yeah. Libra on a higher level is all about the search for right relationship. This is why the Tibetan said, and I paraphrase, but he said basically that Libra is going to be one of the most important supportive energies in support of the dawning Aquarian age, in support of humanity taking the first initiation. And he said that it would pick up in speed as humanity enters into the 21st century. And here we are. Here we are. You see, the search for right relationship. It's so important, friends. And it's related to this first initiation so much so. So the next thing I want to get into to kind of tie some of this together is a little bit of a discussion about what does it mean that the humanity is going to take the first initiation? What does that really mean? Okay. But before doing that, this is another time to open it up for questions. So anybody want to ask any questions?
I'll ask another one. So you had said about, that awakening to the duality. So then that's the awakening. And then now we're, as a humanity, we're in probation, probationary period. And then we're approaching the first initiation. But at the same time, you're saying the masses
are not awake yet.
are not awake.
It does sound like I contradicted myself.
It does.
Isn't that amazing?
Harmony but complex.
Yes. So can I help resolve that? Can I help resolve that? when we say that humanity is approaching the first initiation, we are not saying that every human being is personally ready for it at all. In fact, most individuals will not individually be taking the first initiation. So maybe it would be helpful if I gave you a simple analogy to understand how could that be. Let's use a simple numbering thing. Let's say that a person that's not awake at all on the path. So it's somebody in the masses. If we use the number one, we use the number one to represent the magnitude of their consciousness and its effect on the collective whole. Okay, the number one. Okay. Now let's say that once you step onto the path and have an awakening, so you're now on the probationary path, your consciousness, in terms of its transformational impact to the whole, is multiplied by 10. Now it's worth 10. Okay? And then you take the first initiation, and now it's amplified to 100. Second initiation, 1,000. Third initiation, 10,000. Fourth initiation, 100,000. I'm just trying to give you an idea of how this actually works. So people on the path have, because of their expansion of consciousness, that has a far, far more broad effect on the collective than the individual that hasn't been awake at all. See? So, yeah. It's also kind of connected to, remember the old story of the 100th monkey? The 100th monkey, same concept as well, the 100th monkey principle. Yeah. Okay, everyone, so let's move on to the first initiation. And, I guess one of the things, think of initiation as being, it represents milestones of evolution. In many ways, every initiation represents a measure of mastery over the lower nature. The soul has taken dominion over some part of the lower nature, and it holds a kind of permanency in that dominion. On the probationary path, it's sort of, the soul has it, but then it can't hold on to it. The lower self pulls away. You know, you just like you have the soul that, it's so funny. Wouldn't it be nice if we evolved like this? But it doesn't work that way. We evolve like this. And so that, by the way, that holds true with humanity as a whole, not just an individual. Because what happens is the higher self, you have success, but then you fall back. And so that's the personality saying, not so fast, buddy. Not so fast, buddy. And so, but there comes a point where some permanency of success is occurring, and that's what an initiation is. And the probationary path ends at the time of the first initiation. So let's talk about it. The first initiation is called the birth of the Christ in the heart. It also has a couple other names. One of them is, it's kind of a Christian concept. It's called the initiation of Bethlehem. It's interesting, the initiations often have a kind of Christian tone to them, but they actually apply to everything. And the first initiation for an individual always involves two fundamental measures of achievement. The first is that, as the name implies, the birth of the Christ within the heart. At the first initiation, the heart chakra opens wide, and the Christ has another gateway to express through. You see? And the first initiation, because of that, the first initiation gives that individual a capacity to sense the oneness of humanity beyond theory. It's an experiential sense underlying the diversity of humanity. There's an experiential sense of that it's all really one thing, one living presence. And that causes the individual to become very, very service-driven. And the Tibetan tells us, he says, a first-degree initiate, and I'm going to quote it here, he or she assumes the burden of the future, unquote, to assume the burden of the future. Meaning, I will assume responsibility to live my life in service to the challenges and the transformations of humanity. but it also includes an attitude of recognizing that there's an attitude of thinking about these things in multi-generational and multi-incarnational contexts. I always think, when I think about that, I think of the Native Americans, who, some of the Native American tribes, they used to take seven generations in mind when making big decisions about the tribal direction of the tribe. 7 generations, think about that. We can't even think about the next generation. We're so preoccupied with our own successes, or failures or whatever. So there's a real strong pull towards service and a commitment there. So that's the first part of it. The second part of the first initiation, it has a lot to do with the soul demonstrating mastery over the physical instrument and the physical life. For instance, at the first initiation, the initiate, the first degree initiate has taken dominion over the physical appetites of the physical instrument. It won the day. It doesn't mean it's 100%, but it's like it's got the biggest percentage of a grip on that. So the physical body has its own appetites, and that's natural. But sometimes those appetites just take over. Whereas a first degree initiate is somebody that doesn't mean that they don't need food. It doesn't mean you don't have a sexual life, but what it means is those natural appetites of the physical form, that while they're being expressed or lived out, that a higher part of you has regulatory oversight over it. It's like there's a part of you that recognizes that it's wise to become able to be masterful of it rather than just let it run its own course on its own. It's all because, and it's twofold. That's the part physical, but it's also physical in the outer life. The first degree initiate really becomes much more efficient in understanding how to coordinate activities in the outer world to become more effective. So they live more, they tend to become more organized and more effective through skill and organization. Now, it might look a little different according to what ray you're on, but as a general principle, that's what you're going to see. And many people, I'd say a good percentage of people that are involved in my world, many of my students are people that around the world, I teach in many countries, many of them are either approaching the first initiation, or many actually has taken the first initiation and are working their way to the second initiation. And that distance, by the way, there's different debates about how long it takes to go from the first initiation to the second, but it's certainly probably at least 2 or 3 lives, if not more. That's a big stretch, and many people. A lot of people think initiation. They think, look, if you get a flyer to tell you to go to Sedona, and you can take the first and second, third initiation in a weekend workshop, and it'll only cost you $2,000. Just run. It's nonsense. If people really understood the depth of what's involved, most of the Tibetan had private disciples, 24 disciples that he worked with for 25 years or something like that. All but about 3 of them were first degree initiates, working closely, approaching the second degree. The second degree is really difficult, because that's when you have to become masterful with your emotion and learn how to use emotion and not be used by emotion. But I'm not here to talk about the second initiation. I'm here to talk about the first initiation. So, in a certain sense, think about how that applies to humanity as a whole. You see, in many ways, the crisis of humanity today is really a crisis in the sense that we have to figure out how to be one. And if we don't figure that out pretty soon, we're all in big trouble. We're all in big trouble. And so the key is to be able to realize that we have to be able to realize how to establish right relationship, there's that term again, in order to find oneness. And so the first initiation has so much to do with that idea of searching for right relationship, searching for right relationship. By the way, are you hearing me okay? I was told that it's still hard to hear. Are you okay with this? Okay. And so this is why first degree initiates are people that are committed to serve. Now, a first degree initiate individually generally can't say, they're not able to say, this is my purpose. No. Full realization of purpose, ashramic purpose without any question, that's the third initiation. That's the transfiguration. That's beyond us at this point. But the first initiation is where you have your first sense that you do have a purpose. It is said that at the first degree, the first initiate will experience what is called the first faint tremor of monadic destiny. I know some of you don't know what I mean by monad, but you have a personality, you have a soul, and beyond that you have monad, which is pure spirit. And the monad is the real player of purpose, but you don't awaken to the monad until the third initiation. But at the first initiation, you sense it in the sense of, I think I've got a purpose. I'm here for something. I'm not sure what it is, but I'm here for something. And so what they do, a first degree initiate, what they're going to do, and what I advise them to do is to some clues that can help understand what your purpose is to some extent. One would be astrological clues. So for instance, you are all well advised to know the higher meaning of your rising sign and the higher meaning of your sun sign, because those are really important, particularly the rising sign. Very important in terms of understanding in this incarnation, how does purpose, is it trying to play itself out? Another is what Master Moria once said. He once was asked by disciples, he was asked, how do you know what your purpose is at any given time of your life? And his answer was pretty amazing. He said, well, if you want to know your purpose, a clue is to look at the trend of your thinking. Look at the trend of your thinking, but in your high moments, when you're thinking about the world and what it needs, and what your mind is constantly wanting to thematically go back to over and over and over again. Because in the middle of that trend of thought is a golden thread, and that's it. I'm always reminded of, you remember Joseph Campbell? He once said, he made 3 words famous. You know what those 3 words are? Follow your bliss. As an esotericist, I would rephrase that. I would say, follow the trend of your thinking that gives rise to bliss. See, the causal body, the soul, is found on the higher mental plane. So it has a tendency to launch trends of lofty thought. So what do you like to think about? That's a really important. And that also kind of leads you toward your ray type, because a 5th ray person is going to like to think about breakthroughs in scientific discovery, whereas a 2nd ray soul is much more interested in thinking about innovative ways to uplift and the human spirit through education and the healing arts, that sort of thing, you see. So a first degree initiate doesn't know specifically what their purpose is, but they are definitely on the right track. Now, take it to the humanity as a whole. Humanity as a whole. As I said, the first degree initiate is sensing the whole of humanity as one. Well, we need the whole of humanity to start to realize that as well, you see? And to start to understand that we're in this together and that we need each other. But it has to be understood in an Aquarian way. And Aquarius is all about oneness realized through diversity, while Pisces was all about oneness realized through sameness. Aquarius is oneness not through sameness, but by differentness. And that's so important, because if we can't think about it, how in the world can we possibly find our oneness except if we recognize the sacredness of our diversity? How could we possibly find oneness without that, you see? And that's the beauty of Aquarius, because Aquarius is the sign about oneness through diversity. And that's exactly what we need now, oneness through diversity. But think about it in terms of the physical part of it. See, this initiation is about humanity finding its oneness on a physical level and behaving and redesigning things in order to make it more workable for all of us on a physical level. We're still going to have arguments mentally. We're still going to have disagreements emotionally. We could even, there may be times when we still even have outbreaks of conflict and even war. But in the bigger picture, the most important thing is design the world so that it works for everybody on that physical level. Humanity will not take the second initiation until the end of the Aquarian age, so that's another couple thousand years. Makes you tired, but you're going to be there.
Yeah, you will.
The idea you're going to be there, yeah. Yeah, so if, for instance, a human being who takes the first initiation is showing that they have demonstrated mastery over their physical appetites, then it's the same principle collectively. And if you really think about it, one of the greatest problems in Western society particularly is appetite. If you think about it, I remember reading recently that if Western cultures, and the United States is the worst of all of them, by the way, if Western cultures continue to consume at the rate they're consuming, it would take 4 Earths to supply that. 4 Earths. Think about that.
Yeah.
So we have unbridled, and our part of the problem is our whole economic system is based upon unbridled desire, and it's being inflamed by our sort of unregulated free market advertising. The whole advertising industry is trying to inflame desire. What did the Buddha say? He said that all suffering in the world was because of desire. Because of desire. So we have a real challenge in front of us because we have to rise above measures of desire that have a lot to do with physical things. And yet our whole economic system is based upon that. So we've got some challenges ahead of us in this process. But that's a really important part of this journey, is to understand that. And that's why we should individually look at ourselves that way and say, and know the difference between want and need. Because those two things get muddled up. It reminds me of a Star Trek episode. There was a wonderful Star Trek in the original Star Trek. You guys watch Star Trek, ever?
Absolutely.
You remember what was the name of the show? Amok. Yeah, it's the story about how Spock goes into heat. Remember that one? Spock goes into heat, and he's going crazy on the ship. And it ends up that every 7 years in the Vulcan culture, you're pre-set up to mate, and he steals the Enterprise because it's time, and Kirk knows nothing, can't figure what's wrong with Spock, and he steals the ship, and they go to Vulcan, and he's got his mate waiting for them in a big ritual, and then they finally, Kirk figures it out, and he violates Starfleet Command's rules and actually goes to help Spock out and take him to, and he goes into this ceremony on this arid planet, and it ends up he's coming from a kind of royal background, but the woman that he's destined to meet, and it was agreed upon when they were children, she has the right to have him be challenged, and that never gets exercised, but in this episode it did. And so he's shocked, and he's kind of zombie crazy anyway. He's in heat, he's crazy. And then she decides she also can choose who he fights and who he chooses, or she chooses. It happens that Kirk was in the audience, and she chooses Kirk. So he says, okay, well, I'll Spock, I'll just let him beat me, and then this is all done. So he agrees to it. It's a very formal thing. And then he learns that it's to the death. He didn't know that before he agreed to it. And off the battle begins. And so there's a whole thing about, and McCoy is there and he's able to solve it by giving a fake injection that makes him look dead. Anyway, it's sort of like Romeo and Juliet and the whole thing. Anyway, but there's this great line. I bring this all up to tell you one line. There's this great line at the end when Spock is now, he thinks he's killed the captain and he confronts the woman he's supposed to marry. And he said, "Why did you do this?" And she said, she tried to explain how she was really in love with this other guy and blah, blah, blah. And then he says this, he says, "Always remember, sometimes wanting is greater than having. Wanting is greater than having." And I thought, wow, that's it. That's it. And so much of this issue of desire has to do with us learning the difference between a genuine want versus a need. Genuine want versus a need. So one of the amazing things about this is that this is an initiation that humanity is approaching, and that the new group of world servers are the Tibetan tells us that the future of humanity rests on the shoulders of the new group of world servers. And by the way, if you want to know who they are, I just have one thing to say. Ta-da! You are. If your heart is ablaze with Christ, if your mind is well developed and committed to service to humanity, you're part of that. And the truth is that you and the group as a whole is needed more than ever. I mentioned this the other day, but now I'm giving you the larger context that this is a critical period right now where the best of you is needed at this time in human history to help humanity get across it. Because there's no guarantee. We could mess up. It could really happen. So there's no guarantee. I'm actually optimistic in the long run, but pessimistic more in the short run. It's going to be, I think we got a bit more time. Now, some big things that happen that are also part of this. You know, we're told that the new world servers are, they're also called the forerunners of the light. The forerunners of the light. And they're now in their millions. They're working in every industry. There are people that are rich and poor. There are people who are of all religions and no religions. There are people in every political party. Most of them are working behind the scenes. And their job is to till the soil in preparation for humanity taking the first initiation. So the question is, well, what is the soil? And the answer is this. It's the soil of thought. It's the soil of ideations. You see, because humanity evolves through its relationship to ideations. We have new insights, new ideas come to us. We bring them out. We try to find ways of applying them. And it shapes social institutions and the way we live. And it supports the evolution of consciousness. But every idea eventually runs its course and must be let go for the next paradigm to come into play. And that's where the challenge is. Because I have a saying that I've been saying for years to simply understand this, and let me share it with you. That which is your temple today will become your prison tomorrow. The ideas that you hold as near and dear and true, as long as they continue to enrich you, help you grow, help you become more effective in service to the whole, then it's a temple. But eventually, it has given you all it can. And then you have to take on a next paradigm. But what happens is the lower self, the personality, becomes resistant to the habit of the old pattern. And so increasingly, that temple now becomes your own prison. And the amazing thing about that is, when that happens, not only do you become a prison, you're in a prison, but you also play the role of the warden and the guard. You're the prisoner, the warden, and the guard of the now it's a prison, but it used to be a temple. See, in many ways, that's what's going on today in all our social institutions. There's a tremendous back to the past attitude, holding on to the old thought forms, and a resistance to the new emerging patterns that are necessary for humanity to move forward. So, and that's causing more polarity, and it's the sixth ray energy and the habit of the sixth ray and the habit of the Piscean influence that is so much about the force that's leading us into a prison. But if you're on the path, if you're awake to your own causal body, you should be really, really starting to sense that Aquarian energy and be an advocate of the future. And to be a voice for new and emerging paradigms that have the power to uplift and to unite. It's really, really important. Really, really important. We live in such an interesting time. What a great time to be alive, really, when you think about it. But it's not easy. It's not easy. So, it's important to understand that this new group of world servers is like three groups. I often do a little drama. Have you ever done the drama of the new group of world servers here? Does that ring a bell? Well, some of you would be new anyway. Let me try to do it, and so you understand what I really mean, because usually I have to have a runway. Let's just say that, this section right here, I'm going to dramatize this, okay? This section right here is all of humanity in this section. And we can divide humanity into three parts. This is a simple model of three parts. But imagine that this direction is the past, and that direction is the future. Well, there are three groups. Now, there's a group up here that are very future-oriented, very Aquarian-oriented, and they see the new paradigms. They see the burning ground. In fact, this is the burning ground. This is the burning ground. Everybody's feet are burning. But the group up here, their consciousness has been awakened, and they are starting to sense those new ideas coming. And so they can sense that even though the burning ground is happening here, just over the horizon, just beyond their view, there's a promise of a much better world, and there's no burning ground. In fact, it's dew-laden grass. Be cool to the feet. Okay? And you have a group back here, way at the back. And that group, they aren't awake at all. This is the masses. And that group are easily persuaded, easily manipulated. I'm not telling any names, don't forget, okay? Easily manipulated. And that group, they haven't awoken yet. It's just a natural place, but they haven't awoken to that higher value system. But that group, which is the largest group, they're walking across the hot coals, and they do know three things. Number one, my feet are burning. Number two, every step we go in this direction, it seems to get hotter. And number three, my feet were not burning back there. So they're doing a 180-degree turn, running back to where their feet don't burn. And that's why you have this rise of conservative, fundamentalist, traditional perspectives, and we feel it, we see it, okay? But here's the thing. There's a group in the middle. And that group in the middle is what we call the new group of world servers. And let me share you what they do. That group, they see the vision, just like the group up here. They see the new opportunities over the horizon. They recognize that the grass is dew-laden and cool on the other side, just as well as these people. But the difference between this group up here and this group in the middle is that this group up here, they said, this is where we're going, and you guys in the back, if you're not coming, see you later, we're going this way. But the one in the middle says, you can't neglect that. It's one humanity. We're all in this together. The last weary pilgrim must come home. And so their attitude about that group in the back is crucial. And if I were to gesture that the position of the middle group, the new group of world servers. It's as if they are strongly connected to that, and they have their hand this way in direction, but in this way, they're facing this way and trying to do this. And they're trying to shape language, shape effects, bring love, understanding, and try to bring that group to feel more secure to come in this direction so we can move together. That's the new group of world servants. The people up here that are on the front end, they're awakened, but they're on the probationary path. They're idealistic and visionary, but don't have the full scope of the fullness of humanity and the necessity of serving the whole. Yet they will. But this group does. You get that? And that's what's required right now. Right now. So we have about 10 more minutes before we have to conclude. Any questions you'd like to ask? Anything you want to look into? I'm looking at Mary, counting on her to. Anything you'd like to ask?
I have a question.
Yes, go ahead.
So I find in my day-to-day life, people that focus and speak about the burning ground.
Yeah.
And ain't it awful?
Yeah.
And, everything's chaotic. And for me, my truth is that there's so much beauty here.
Yeah.
And the earth is just this beautiful experience.
Mm.
And I don't know what to say to that. I don't know how to, like you said, reach out your hand. What can you give us any tips on how we can reach out to those that are just seeing the burning ground? Does that make sense?
Yeah, sure. And it's an interesting point, because one of the problems with this polarity is that increasingly it becomes black and white thinking. See, but when you get into this, you realize that that's a primitive consciousness, that there's actually it's not that simple to look at life as here's the good guys and here's the bad guys. I often tell the story, and probably told it in Minneapolis a couple of times, but there was a time many years ago where I did a talk in Phoenix, Arizona. This is probably a good 15, 20 years ago. And it was in some sort of an alternative church, and there was a big audience there, about 150 people. And I was asked, as well as other speakers, to speak, and I had a 20-minute window to speak. And I got up on the stage, and I started by saying, look, everybody, there's a lot of people here. I've got a presentation. You may have questions, but if I can get to them at the end, I will, but please hold off on questions, okay? So I began to talk. I was about 5 or 10 minutes into this, and all of a sudden a woman in the back stands up and looks at me and points her finger, and she says, I just want to know one thing from you. And everybody got it. She said, do you believe in the Antichrist? Right away I realized I must have a fundamentalist Christian in my midst. So I paused and I said, well, I actually do. And then I said, I can even tell you who it is. By the way, everybody got really quiet. Really quiet. And I said, if you want to know who the Antichrist is, just look in the mirror. That's what I said. And then immediately after that, I said, and if you want to know who the Christ is, just look in the mirror. Because you don't even have to move. Because you and I are a place where two forces interface in each of us. What is Christ anyway? Christ is the principle of love and wisdom and inclusivity. And what is Antichrist? It's any state of consciousness that is antithetical to that. And each of us is a mixture of darkest light at different proportions. The darkness in each of us represents the part of the personality that is not yet infused by the soul, not yet under the full control of the soul. You see, everything is a mixture of darkness and light. In the 6th ray age and Piscean age, it also tends to be very black and white thinking. That's why over the last 2,000 years, there's been a real emphasis on the heaven and hell. you're saved or you're not, good and evil. But it's far more nuanced than that. When you're faced with two things, the question is not which is the good guy and which is the bad guy, what's good, what's right and wrong and good and evil. The question is, what is the proportion of light and darkness here versus the proportion of light and darkness here? And in that relativity of measurement, we can make wiser decisions. But this idea of black and white thinking, it's really primitive consciousness. And that black and white thinking is rising up even stronger now because of the overlap of the polarities, you see. So it's really about helping people see that everything is a mixture of dark and light, including me, including you. Now, one of the most difficult things that has really come out of the black and white thinking and the extremeness of perception here today is the rise in conspiratorial thinking. One of the most destructive forces happening in the world today. Because it doesn't take into account at all this idea that everything is light and dark. Instead, it's pointing the finger of accusation without any capacity to the sense that the thing you disagree with, there's some elements of it that have wisdom to it, even though you might overall disagree with it. Can you see the goodness in the thing that you actually disagree with? Can you do it? The Tibetan says this, in the book Treatise on White Magic, there's a section called the 15 Counsels. It's part of Rule 10, where are the Rule 10, 15 Counsels. You have to be there to know what I was just doing. Okay, the 15 Counsels. One of those counsels, I think it's number 2, he says this, and I paraphrase. Find the golden truth within illusion. Find the thread of truth within the thing you disagree with. And make sure you see that clearly. And that will help you to see that everything has this blending. It's a proportional thinking. Evolution of consciousness is also the evolution of right proportional thinking, or what Master Moria would call the art of co-measurement. The art of co-measurement. Master Moria is the head of the first reaction. Co-measurement, the art of co-measurement. You know, the Tibetan and the Alice Bailey writings, I actually checked out, what did he have to say about conspiracy thinking? Well, the word conspiracy isn't in any of the books, but the root of conspiracy is in there. It's the subject of suspicion. Now, remember I said earlier, I mentioned the word glamour, and I said that glamour is a distortion. He actually says that suspicion, which is the root of conspiracy thinking, suspicion, he calls it the most poisonous of all the glamours. The most poisonous. And the sad thing about this is that as a teacher of this philosophy, it ends up that a lot of people in the esoteric community are being caught in this thing. And they're very conspiratorial. And it's really tragic. It's really tragic. He said there are times when maybe suspicion has some merit, but he said even then it's wrong because it emphasizes the principle of separateness. And he also says in other places, he says the greatest obstacle to humanity's future is what he called the heresy of separateness. The heresy of separateness. So helping people to recognize the light and dark in everything is like a really, really good thing to do. See, all of that was to answer your question. I hope it helped. There's many other things, but I hope that's an idea to think about.